Sort of glad we got the primer of everything that's been going on in the Middle East out of the way yesterday, because the conflict is starting to ramp up and it's looking a lot like what was happening last year, but it has a much different feel to it, and we'll get to that shortly. But the newest piece of, unfortunate events is the most charitable way to put it. West Bank Synagogue bleachers collapse, kills 2 people, including a 12-year-old boy. Yeah, amid all of the fighting that's there, one of the casualties was an uncompleted synagogue, and full worship was happening, and a collapse happened amid rocket strikes as usual. So it's sad. At least 2 people were killed, including a 12-year-old boy, including more than 150 others hurt in the West Bank on Sunday when a bleacher collapsed during a packed holiday prayer service at the Jewish synagogue. And that's another thing that tends to happen whenever these conflicts tend to ramp up. It's always in the midst of either an Islamic or a Jewish holiday. Whenever it falls in their calendar's purview, that tends to be when these attacks ramp up. The ultra-Orthodox house of worship was still under construction, but being used for the Shavuot, it's some Jew name, service in the Givat Ziv. Again, not pronouncing that correctly, not out of malice, just out of ignorance. Near Jerusalem when tragedy struck. In addition to a young boy being killed, a man in his 50s also did not survive the collapse. Israel's emergency service told the local outlet the holiday service was being held at the synagogue even though the building's owners didn't have the proper permits. Oy vey, you should have talked to the building supervisor, said the head of the Israeli fire and rescue service. Israel's Channel 12 reports. This building is not finished. It doesn't even have a permit for occupancy, and therefore let alone holding events in it. So kind of retarded, but this is one of those tragedies that's going on right now in amidst the ones that are just, so astroturfed, you'd expect to see Barry Sanders breaking fools' ankles, making cuts, because they are all over the globe, and it's following a pattern that we seen last year. Okay, you guys remember all the Black Lives Matter riots that were going on. These ones are following that pattern. Okay, go in, attack, destroy, and then the media will run cover for one side, not the other. And first thing we have here is in Montreal, as if there's not enough fucking unrest going on there right now with all of the anti-lockdown protests that are going on as well. Like, we're building up to quite a powder keg, right? Because at this time last year, there wasn't the anti-lockdown protests, at least not on the wide scale that we have them right now. Like, thousands of people are turning up in Toronto for those. I'm sure that they're happening other places across the country as well. Just in Canada right now, those are the only places, because every other country and all the states in the United States are kind of coming to their better senses, with the exception of California and New York, because, well, for obvious reasons. But we got a whole bunch of different examples of what's going on, and it's fucking nuts, guys. At Pro-Israel rally in Montreal, Quebec, held to voice support for Israel amidst a growing violence in the region, pro-Palestinian counter-protesters clashed with rally attendants and police officers in an attempt to disrupt and end the event. Yeah, that's following maybe not the Black Lives Matter rallies, but I seem to remember there were some certain protests that were going on. Peaceful protests, people would come in, waving their little flags, calling out for things like, I don't know. Let's just say election integrity for something that would have just gone on and everything was fine. And then people all dressed in black, waving flags of their own, would come in and start agitating. Or by agitating, I mean sucker punching people and knocking them cold and dragging their face across the concrete. Something like that. Something immediately springs to mind for a perfect comparison. At the Pro-Israel rally in Montreal, Quebec, held to voice support for Israel amidst growing violence in the region. Yes, pro-Palestinian counter-protesters crashed with rally attendants and police officers in an attempt to disrupt and end the event. Video from early on in the event shows rally attendants dancing to music and flying Israel flags while counter-protesters across the street chant Israel terrorists. So one side is peacefully protesting and the other side is agitating. You already know where this is going to be going. Palestinian counter-protests across the street from the pro-Israel group group was chanting Israel terrorists. Palestinian counter-protesters eventually broke through the police lines, resulting in arguments and clashes with both rally attendants and officers. 3 people from the Palestinian side tried to steal a woman's Israeli flag, because they always go after the tough targets, and reportedly pepper sprayed 2 women while on the Israeli rally side. Oh my god. As the 3 attempted to break up the rally, a man on a microphone tells rally attendants not to engage the counter-protesters. A witness tells the reporter that 3 people from the Palestinian side came over to the Israeli side and tried to steal an Israeli flag and pepper sprayed 2 women. Awesome. But this isn't a unique situation, and why would the only protests happen in fucking Montreal of all places? But also earlier in the week in New York City, which is just one of the many other places. I just happen to find New York City as the place to pull up, just showing you that it's happening in Canada, it's happening in the United States. And we're going to save the worst for last, because one city took it up a notch. Israeli and Palestinian protesters clashed in violent scenes in New York City on Tuesday as demonstrations erupted across the United States as cops struggled to separate the warring crowds. Yeah, they struggled because they're defunded. It's almost like they were setting the table for something like this to be happening. Maybe they didn't anticipate this to be so soon, because it would take a fucking stretch Armstrongian reach in order to connect the two. Because the reason that these protests, these riots, these conflicts are going to continue to escalate is because it is just such a misunderstood situation. Like, it took me a very long time to find a side, right? I had a gut feeling, gathered information on both sides, ultimately sided with what my gut was telling me. Whereas the disinformation that's out there is just so prevalent. Like, it's so fucking easy to see. Like, what's getting all the coverage? Like, you got the pictures here. It's like, oh, look at that. They're just marching, and it's really easy to tell that these people were probably marching last year, because they got the same look on their face. It looks like the same demographic of people who would have been marching out there with their George Floyd banners, with their already printed up signs. It's just so phony. It's just so fake. And they're the ones initiating the contact with the police officers. Like, okay, if you were marching down the street, it's New York City. They're just going to let you do whatever the fuck you want anyways. Even though I'd consider this to be illegal, and I'm pretty sure it is anyways, just marching down the street stupidly like this. Meanwhile, you have to have the Israeli counter-protesters or peaceful protesters behind the barricades. Otherwise, they'd just get their ass kicked like they were in New York. Or rather, Montreal. This is in New York. And then, of course, they're trying to, the Palestinian side, this is, insert racism into this. Is it a big racist conflict there? It's more of an ideological conflict, more of a religious conflict. I think that's exactly what it is. And then what are they trying to evoke by throwing in apartheid? Well, they're trying to invoke what happened in South Africa when it was a black and white apartheid. And then eventually they'll just try to spin it into more racism in the United States, because what side the media is taking right now, it's making it very obvious that their side is the pro-Palestinian side. And everybody is trying to demonize the Israeli side. It's becoming more and more obvious that this is going to be the cause du jour for 2021. And like I said, we were saving the best for last, and the most despicable for last, and that would be London, England. My friends, you guys picked it up one hell of a notch, and like I said, this conflict, these types of protests have more legs because there are more Jews, there are more Muslims throughout the world, okay? You can't fall back on the racism narrative in the UK, in France, in Germany even, because it's like, okay, for one, the UK abolished slavery. They were the first ones to do it, and France wasn't that far behind, and they weren't set up the same way that the United States were, with the undermining of racial segregation. That's a whole nother bag of worms, but they weren't set up properly. That's why you'd have the little spikes in BLM protests, BLM riots, and then it would just fade away. You didn't have this sustained push across the pond. Not even in Canada, really. It would just pop up every now and again, okay? We were more concerned with the anti-lockdown protests, but these ones seem to have some legs. But this is also the early days, so we'll see. But the conflict itself over there between Israel and Palestine, that has some legs. That has decades and decades and generation of anger and turmoil. But this is just a snapshot of what happened yesterday or earlier today. Pro-Palestinian convoy drives through London. Protesters yell, "Fuck the Jews, rape their daughters." In London, 4 people have been arrested, but British politicians have reacted with disgust and anger at footage posted on social media appearing to show pro-Palestinian protesters driving through Jewish neighborhoods in London, with a protester heard yelling through a loudspeaker anti-Semitic and sexually violent comments. Yes, but it's fine because it's against Jews, right? What the fuck? The footage retweeted by prominent politicians showed several cars draped in Palestinian flags driving downtown Finchley Road in St. John's Wood, North London. Of course it happens in London. Oh, the tolerance center of the United Kingdom, right? Well, that's what they'd like for you to believe, but that's just not, in fact, the case. One man is heard shouting through a loudspeaker remarks including, "Fuck the Jews, fuck their mothers, fuck their daughters, fuck their goats." Oh, I'm sorry, rape their daughters. Delightful. Remarking on the sight of 3 men standing through their sunroofs, wow, it must be a big old sunroof, waving Palestinian flags, London Jewish newspaper Jewish News compared it to scenes reminiscent from the darkest days of the Islamic State. London's Metropolitan Police announced that it was investigating the footage, saying, "We are aware of the videos that show anti-Semitic language, yes, being shouted, and I'm sure we'll just get right on it." But like I said, it was the worst, but at the same time, it's also starting to be taken care of. 4 arrests, but see if they get prosecuted, and see if that's the end of it. I highly, highly doubt it. Mostly because what do the people who are actually in power have to say? What do the people who have something to say? We had some UK politicians, but it was just your general hand-wringing there. Oh, they should be held accountable, and there's no room for hate in the UK. Go fuck off. Do something about it. How about that? We got Netanyahu. Palestinian terrorist organization was in building used by the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, the one that they bombed, the one that we talked about yesterday. Yep, they knew they were there. They're denying it, of course, but wouldn't you? Mostly because, the press are supposed to be sacred. They're supposed to be allowed to do whatever they want, and you shouldn't prosecute them because they're just innocent journalists who didn't do nothing wrong, of course. Yeah, that's why in specifically Portland, I can at least recall this, you'd have Antifa members posing as members of the press in order to get in and still stir shit up. So is it that big of an intellectual leap to believe that terrorists would somehow operate under the cover of the press in a much larger scale in a hot conflict zone? Yeah, no, it doesn't really shock me in the least. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on May 16th that the Israeli Defense Force are trying to degrade Hamas's terrorist abilities amid escalating fighting during the past week, which saw Hamas and related groups fire numerous rockets into Israeli civilian areas and prompted Israel to respond with numerous airstrikes. Netanyahu told CBS News that any country has to defend itself and has a natural right of self-defense. Exactly. We will do whatever it takes to restore and quiet and on the security of our people in deterrence. We're trying to degrade Hamas's terrorist abilities and degrade their will to do this again, the longtime Prime Minister said, adding that he hopes the conflict doesn't last long. I don't know, because the reason everything was so quiet was because the United States and Israel had a very good understanding, had a very good relationship over the past 4 years. Probably the biggest thing outside of the Abraham Accords, of course, was the fact that after, nearly 2 decades, this was approved in 1996, mind you, the United States Embassy was approved under the Clinton administration to be moved to Jerusalem. And once Trump took the reins, what was one of the first things that he did? Well, moved that embassy, I forget where it was, and moved it to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, everything is ramped up because, gave the keys over to somebody who couldn't even point to Israel on a map, let alone support them properly. And then you have somebody with significant sway, even though he's, I'm an independent. Fuck off. You run for president under the Democratic ticket twice. You can't really sell me on this whole, no, I'm an independent. I don't know, I like the freedom that comes with it. There's no dress code, and I can comb my hair with a stick of dynamite if I want. Sanders' Israeli government includes people who are overt racists. He should know. He's a Jew. U.S. must demand Palestinian rights respected. No. Not when they're the ones who are constantly initiating all of the conflict. And not when he makes such stupid, misinformed statements such as that. They're overt racists within your own party, within your own walls. You should probably be looking at them. Anyways, what did the great-great-great-grandfather of the squad have to say? Said Sunday on MSNBC's Velshi, one of those other fucking useless talking heads who probably gets outdrawn by literally anybody on YouTube, that the financial aid the United States sends the Israeli government, which he claims includes people who are overt racists. Care to quantify that burn? Meant America had to right to demand that they respect the human rights of all people, including the Palestinians. Yeah, just go ahead and give in to the Palestinian demands. Give in to Hamas's demands. What are their demands? That would involve a whole lot of bloodshed. The Israeli government has evolved over the past years into a pretty strong right-wing government. Fucking Netanyahu, for as long as I can remember, he's been the president. So, I don't know where this is coming from. It's just sounding like he's using a bunch of buzzwords in order to stoke fear. And MSNBC is more than sympathetic to lending him an ear for this. Or perhaps some of your funds, because I am asking you once again. Anyways. When you have the United States of America pulling almost $4 billion a year into Israel, we have the right to demand, no you don't, that they respect the human rights of all people, yes, within their own borders, including the Palestinians. Nope, because they want to shrink and ultimately abolish their borders. What we need now is an even-handed policy, which protects the security of Israel. There's no negotiating to be had with Palestine, with Hamas, with Hezbollah. All of those, well, quite frankly, genocidal governments that are out there that only want the subjugation and outright genocide of the Jews. And this is where I can't find a measured response on the other side, okay? Because what do they keep doing? Like I said yesterday, the only response I'm seeing is, oh, you have all those America first people, and really all they are is Israel first. And it's like, wait, what? No, the root cause in the Middle East is everybody wants the extermination of fucking Israel. It's there. It's been there in different forms, in different incarnations since the dawn of fucking time, for Christ's sakes. For as long as we've had borders, it's been there. Deal with it. But no, there's petty squabbling, which resulted in several dozen dead right now during this conflict and numerous amounts of casualties in the past. I can see the battle lines being drawn right now. The mainstream narrative is very pro-Palestinian. Why is that? They can't quantify it. All they can do in response is demonize the other side, which isn't a compelling argument, at least to me. It might be for some other people, and clearly it's working because you could see all of the protests that are out there right now. A massive scale, like we got the one in New York City. Not fucking small amount of people to turn out. And if they understood half of what they were protesting for, what they were advocating for, maybe they might change their tune. Who really knows, actually? But these are the same people who were out there before waving around their Black Lives Matter banners, because apparently that's on the back burner now. I just see it as the natural progression of what happened last year, evolving into this. And the way that I see the conflagration between Trump supporters and right-wingers, as Bernie Sanders would have it put, with the pro-Israel types, whenever they make those comparisons, they're like, oh, the Ben Shapiro supporters. Save it, okay? If you want bad information, if you want misinformed opinions, you go to Ben Shapiro. Oh, it was fun in 2015, 2016, 2014 even, going all the way back in time, listening to him destroy with facts and logic college kids who have the same amount of information on the subject as the people who would be protesting out there in the streets. Oh, he looked like a superstar, but whenever he was pressed by anybody of similar or even greater knowledge, he would fold like a cheap suit, one that his wife would pick out. And you guys remember, she's a doctor, of course, for little Benji to wear. And it's always hilarious to hear those people say, oh, America First types, Ben Shapiro types, the Johnny-come-latelys, the ones who were vehemently anti-Trump until about, 2019, 2020, when his audience decided, hey, if you're not going to hop on the bandwagon, we're going to turn off. There's a reason he has the biggest news platform on the biggest social media site online. Because he has the ability to shapeshift that makes Mystique jealous. Now, the more I'm starting to read about this, the more I'm starting to understand this, the more I'm starting to grab different perspectives, or at least attempt to, the more I'm starting to see this as a black and white issue. And that's what makes it very, very unsettling is what the future of this could hold. If this gets wrapped up very, very shortly in the Middle East, I don't see that happening. Of course, at least a cessation of the current conflict. I don't think the entire overarching narrative there is going to get solved anytime soon. That would involve somebody who would want to actively bring about peace in the Middle East, and Biden's too busy playing with Legos, and he heard something about bombing, and he's thinking that Eisenhower dropped the bomb, trying to place a call to Tojo. It's a weird one, and this is the first weekend of these types of protests, and as things start warming up, as more holidays start approaching, I know Memorial Day is in 2 weeks up here in Canada and some other developed countries. We have our version of Memorial Day. It's called Victoria Day, for Queen Victoria, because Canada can never truly be separate from its parents. It's like a shitty millennial. We have our 3-day weekend coming up next weekend, and we'll see how violent the protests get, because, we got on one side the anti-lockdown protests, which are still raging on, and then we have this type of conflict going on as well. So it'll be an interesting cross-section to see if everything starts to heat up or if things start dropping off. I hope for the latter, but I'm expecting the former. And now we have some good election integrity news coming up next. This is about the darkest the stuff gets, because we just got to have a laugh here for the next couple of videos to end the day. Thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.